So good morning, Commissioner. It's May 31st already, the last day of the month. It's hard to believe time is absolutely flying by.
Really, I mean, this weekend has been, this whole week actually has been pretty tough. I've had difficulty sleeping myself and really just thinking of what words I would actually pull together for today.
Sure. And I think amidst all the unrest in our communities, what we want to highlight today is that this actually is the end of Mental Health Awareness Month. We've certainly talked about Foster Care Appreciation Month, but mental health is something very prevalent in our communities and is exacerbated by what we are seeing around us. And earlier in the week, one of our staff sent in a poem actually to our COVID-19 mailbox that was really poignant. Part of the quote from the poem says, "We are in the same storm, but not in the same boat." We felt that was very telling for today's message. Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we've been not only getting a lot of information from that COVID mailbox, but we're able to kind of take the temperature of our staff as we try to navigate through the pandemic. But images from across the country this week have left us with a sense of anger, worry, frustration, uncertainty. When you say the names of George, Brianna, and Ahmad, they just happen to be at the top of the list right now because of images that have been captured by video recordings, but they are certainly not the only people who have been impacted by violence in communities that we serve. What we see is reaction. What we see is, decades and generations of racial trauma that have, gripped communities of color across this country. And, while of course we don't condone violence, we understand where that rage may come from. And I think it's important for us to recognize that at a point in time that we're in right now, for such a time as this, is the responsibility of an agency like ours to recognize the two kind of things that are happening and converging at the same time. And one is the pandemic itself and its impact on communities of color and society as a whole, but then also the predator of racism that kind of has just consumed the airways. And social media is a barometer of how polarizing both of those topics can be. And, we as a child protection agency have to recognize the humanity behind all of the images that we see and the sentiment behind them and respond accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And Commissioner, I think that as you have led us through the pandemic and now we have this tremendously stressful time across our country, one of the things that we want to make sure we reinforce with staff is how we as an agency are striving to make ourselves do better and to address disproportionality and disparate treatment of the children and families that we serve. That is what we can control. And some of those systems, to highlight are that we are focusing on our acceptance rate, the substantiation rate, and the transfer rate, along with taking a look at our placement and permanency data, to really understand our own trends as it relates to race and decision making. We also know that we have had a very strong statewide racial justice work group that has been in operation for a number of years and has looked at systematic issues that are impacting the entire system in which we operate. And a great example of their work was, again, this week, we had another forum entitled The Color of COVID, which takes a look at the disparate outcomes of COVID-19 on families of color. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think about how well developed our statewide racial justice work group is in comparison to, other systems and their understanding of diversity, cultural competency, disparity, and disparate outcomes. And even with such a well developed work group, we have spent over a decade, filling our toolbox and guiding the department to focus on areas that really reflect disparate outcomes, really reflect the experiences of our staff. Even with that, we know that this is going to be a challenge for us as a system to respond. I think about the fact that if we were all together physically in buildings, that, it would be this work that would propel or compel us to pull together and have forums and have discussions about what's happening around us. And, that's happened in the past. And in some locations, those conversations have started out as well intended, but the emotions around such a hot topic that impacts all of us sometimes kind of take over, and it becomes really uncomfortable for folks to express how they're feeling, when people are upset, afraid, or scared. And then it also becomes difficult when there are others who don't have that perspective or don't understand where that comes from. And then therein lies sometimes the clash and the issues that start out as being well intended and then just kind of bubble up into not knowing how to respond. So I would encourage everyone across the department, as you think about how we do our work in this context, to tap our members of our statewide racial justice work group. Monica Rams is the director of multicultural affairs. Jen Augusti has been our consultant from the outside, and then Tina Jefferson, the bureau chief of child welfare, lead that group. And so as we kind of venture into yet another time period that our country is, grappling with events that impact the work that we do, we want to encourage the statewide racial justice work group to be kind of the hub of some of those conversations to help facilitate discussions and dialogue, so we don't just open up raw emotions without kind of using the information that can be contained in those forums as a call to action. And that's what the second session of the Color of COVID did. We had the CEO of Trinity Health Network, Dr. Reggie Eady, who took us through the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. And for me, as I think about the information that Dr. Eady imparted to us, I think about our role as a child protective agency and the recovery efforts as we trudge through still the responses to the actual pandemic, but then also the recovery. So if I think about the overwhelming circumstances that our societies that our society is in right now, I think the recovery itself is kind of couched in three different words, and that's understanding of the perspective of each other in our workforce and of the families that we serve. Empathy towards the circumstances of kind of having to deal with the emotional strife of the unrest in the country, and just people being tired of the impact of institutional and generational racism as it relates to inequity and inequality. But then at the same time, we have to approach this with a level of authenticity. As our workers begin more and more interface with our public, with the families that we serve, we have to approach what our communities are going through in the face of just complete, here I am like losing my words again, but I think it's important for us to recognize that if we're not honest and truthful about what our role is in all of this, our families will recognize that we're not being authentic. So the last piece of that is authenticity. So understanding what people are going through, empathy for what our system has experienced and what our families go through and what our workforce is going through, and then the authenticity of how we need to approach everything moving forward.
And again, Commissioner, when I hear you speak, you talk about wanting input and staff reaching out and expressing their views and collaborating with others. We have a big week ahead of us in the department, in that we are going to be receiving input from our statewide advisory council, our legislators, the Department of Public Health, our community providers and partners across the state, including youth and families, regarding their thoughts on the department resuming full operations. How is that fitting into your world and in all of what you have just spoken about?
Yeah, one can't be separated from the other.
You can't.
And I honestly believe that as we get input from, our staff internally and those entities that you just talked about, it has to have the undercurrent and the foundational discussion related to inequity and racial injustice. And, as a whole, as we help dig our families out of this, we have to understand the broader implications of all of this. And, that's why I think, although I have no authority over, people's worldview or their personal experiences, but what I do have is the responsibility to make sure that our department is responding to where the needs are, and that we are responsive and that we are accountable for our actions. So, that's my job, to set the tone of how we kind of help shepherd us through all of this. And it's important to give voice to that and to make sure that we know that the experiences that we face are not unique, but that they are couched in all of this that's happening around us.
Mm-hmm. And one of the recommendations and feedback that you heard very early on from not just internal staff, but external partners as well, was around access to testing. And last Friday, we were very excited to stand up testing for our staff at Solent North and level 1 investigators in that particular catchment area. Can you talk a little bit about that, and again, the importance and how we're going to roll out that statewide testing across other regions as well?
Yeah, it's important for us to recognize one of the things that I heard in the open mailbox was this notion of wanting to know how our staff would have access to testing and how we would have access to understand just really how pervasive the transmission of the disease was impacting our workforce. And I was successful at talking to the folks at the Emergency Incident Command about including our direct care workers in their broad scale testing of state employees, as well as the front-facing staff members who are designated level 1. It's important for the broader aspect of contact tracing, but I think it's also important for our staff to have that sense of anxiety lessened by knowing what their own status is. And, we really have to understand that this virus has so many unknowns that if using the testing capacity that's been afforded to us helps us answer some questions and helps us protect ourselves and our families and the communities that we're much better, I think it's important that we take advantage of this opportunity. So we did start some of the testing as well. We also started with some additional staff members who have those direct care and frontline responsibilities, and so far good.
So, Commissioner, you've broken up sporadically during those comments. So I wanted to reiterate a few things that you said to make sure staff were very clear. At the beginning of your response, what you said was that the recommendation for more widespread testing came directly out of staff's feedback into the COVID-19 mailbox. So again, a connection with staff offering their input, taking their time to express their thoughts, and then you operationalizing the response to that. And at the end of your statement, what I believe we heard you say is that, again, working in our 24/7 facilities, it's imperative to have testing given the nature of the work. But we also know that the virus can be present in individuals who are asymptomatic. So the virus is taking on different forms depending on what researchers and medical providers that you listen to. So this is a way that we have started to roll out testing, and we hope as we get approval for additional tests and additional volume, we will roll this out statewide. So Commissioner, I think this was the point in time in our message where you wanted to give to staff the opportunity to shut off their videos if they wanted to, as you talk about the number of staff who have tested positive. So it looks like the commissioner has.
Yeah, we're going to share this.
Yeah, Commissioner, can you hear me? It looks like we have a bad connection. So what I can do, Commissioners, I'll provide this this part of the update for you as we're struggling with the connections today. So again, if staff do not want to hear this information, you can certainly stop the video at this point. What we do know is that we have 34 total staff that have tested positive. 27 of them have returned to work. We've had 61 of our foster parents, both core and kin and therapeutic foster parents, that unfortunately have tested positive. And we have 13 children in our care, 10 of which are in congregate care, 3 of which are in foster care that have tested positive. Commissioner, anything else you'd like to add to those numbers as we close out today? All right, go.
Make sure that people hear from me. I want us to take care of each other, take care of our families, and take care of our communities.
So to reiterate, we must take care of each other, we must take care of our families, and we must take care of those in the community. Okay, so Commissioner, please enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. We know that, like so many of us, we will be glued to the television and thinking about those individuals who've just been so oppressed in the communities that have been so downtrodden with the negative history that we talked about today. So have a great week, and we will see you soon.
Yep.